I think it's fair to say that this is kind of a tough time in our country and around the world. It's ironic, honestly, the things that are stressing people out so much right now will seem very small in the near future. We are moving around the world, bumping into each other, falling in love, making babies, and nothing looks the same. In some ways, the highly contentious Indigenous discussion about who's Native and who decides has a parallel to the national discussion about immigration and culture wars. They're both reactions to things changing so fast that it looks unrecognizable in an effort to slow that down or stop it. Both positions will be terribly disappointed because there is no way to stop humans from moving around, falling in love, making babies, and doing all that stuff. It's weird because as we become more diverse, it means we will obviously end up being more homogenous. That's the tension. And it's behind all the culture wars and, which things, stories, and people deserve primacy of place in our public spaces. So today I'm going to share a few thoughts about what does Indigenous Peoples Day mean and how we can use this as an inflection point to make things different and better. And I'm going to start in kind of a strange place, but it'll all come together. Who wants to live a long time? Okay, I'm glad to see so many hands going up. Yeah. If not, we have lots of people with degrees who'd be happy to see you on the side afterwards. I think all humans, of all persuasions, cultures, and backgrounds, when you drill right into it, will offer this idea that they want their kids to have a decent chance at a long, healthy, happy life. Where they differ is about what they think those kids are going to need to have a long, healthy, happy life. Those are the political differences, the policy differences, and so many of the other things. But all cultures, I think that's a pretty common through line. And I get to wear many hats. So, I work at Bemidji State University. I'm a language and culture guy, but I also have a PhD in history. And through my research, I've been bumping into, not only in my own personal life, but with a lot of the stories I've been navigating and researching, a lot of Native people who have lived a remarkably long life. Yeah, Archie Mosé was a spiritual leader from the St. Croix Reservation in Wisconsin. He was actually enrolled at Mille Lacs, but lived over at St. Croix. And he was an important spiritual mentor to me. Born in 1901, he passed away in 1996. His father had lived to the age of 102 and was born in 1869, died in 1971. And this guy was like a blast from the past. His kids were born in wigwams. He spoke only Ojibwe. He met his first white man at the age of 12, which was an American experience. And he saw his first black man at the age of 30. Same time he saw a car. When I met him, he was in a little modern house watching WWF SmackDown on a TV and laughing really loud. Some big changes. He was good friends with a man from another tribe named Jim Funmaker. Perfect name for him. He was a Ho-Chunk guy. And he was still driving at age 102. And he'd get pulled over by the cops. And he'd tell the cops, "Boy, look at my license. You see how old I am? I have to speed. I might die before I get there." And the cop would laugh and let him go. And there were so many others. Famous Ojibwe chief Buffalo, Roger Jourdain, who was tribal chair at Red Lake for 32 years in a row. Just remarkable stories. But there were other folks too. Noden Wind, who was, among other things, Grand Marshal for the 4th of July parade in Bemidji, Minnesota. in 1976 on the 200th anniversary of Minnesota, and he'd lived through more than half of America's first 200 years. It's pretty wild. And then these guys, Gagige Gijik from Warroad, Minnesota, who had lived well over 100 years. He would be the record holder if his birth date had been documented. And John Smith, also famous from Leech Lake, who had lived in 3 different centuries. Born in the 1700s, passed away in 1922. There before any white settlement, and still there when the soldiers are coming back from World War I and stuff like that. What amazing changes they must have seen. I think we'd all like to crack the code on what do they do. By the way, the official record holder for human longevity belongs to this woman from France, who passed away at 122 years. Thinking about what are the through lines, and I'm going to zoom out first and then we'll zoom in and talk about Indigenous Peoples Day. I read some of these books. These are famous books by non-Indigenous authors. Outlive, Dr. Atia, and he's saying eat right, exercise, keep lifting weights even when you're an elder, get enough sleep, that kind of stuff. But there's another thing that he talked about, and you can see it in Malcolm Gladwell's, I just read Outliers, amazing book. Stories about people who've achieved incredible things, and what he really says is that each of them, from the Beatles to Bill Gates, are really not such remarkable outliers, so much as they seized opportunity and in the most common ways. 10,000 hours to master something. And so it's both the opportunity and the seizing of it. And then the Good Life famous, this is the big longitudinal study that Harvard did on happiness. And they would take health conditions as well as interview people across multiple generations over a long, long period of time. If you ask somebody about their life over the past 50 years or 100 years, they're going to have a perspective, but it's really different when you check in each one of their years up to 100 years and find out what they're thinking at the moment. All of these guys and all of these elders that I'd worked with and studied did have a common through line, which is that humans are complex. We would love for it to be simple. Just do a carnivore diet and you're all set, right? Just do this exercise regimen and your problems are all behind you. But we need all kinds of things. Yes, eat right and exercise does matter. But relational health matters way more than we've ever imagined. The quality of relationships pays huge dividends to longevity and to happiness. That might not sound like rocket science. It's kind of common sense. But achieving relationship health, and that doesn't just mean marital or romantic relationship, healthy relationships with kids, extended family, community, your neighbors, that you cannot put a big enough emphasis on. And I think one of the things that is challenging this for all of us, while we, like human longevity was less in previous times than it is today, because of innovations in modern medicine and all kinds of things. At the same time, it is plateaued, and sometimes, not just during COVID, we've seen drops in human longevity. We're bumping up against the boundaries of what medicine can deliver. I want you to think about the importance of that. Keep that in the back of your mind and put it in the context of how humans have treated each other throughout time and how we're doing at that today. Because there's plenty we can do and do differently. You might have heard about Abraham Maslow. He did Maslow's hierarchy of needs, famously published. You know, he has this stuff. You've got your physical needs, food, clothing, shelter, and if you kind of move up the pyramid at the very top, you know, doing a pirouette, self-actualization and, you know, all of that. That's what his study says, and it's been widely adopted and incorporated in a lot of not just scientific but modern social understandings about what does it look like to thrive. What is less commonly known is that Maslow, who is a psychologist, was also kind of part anthropologist. His initial study was among the Blackfeet. And in his study, this pyramid that he has shared with the world is not what he found. He actually found that the healthy humans, the self-actualization part, was really at the bottom and base of the pyramid. And that when you look at it, there's actually a community-based actualization, which is one of the biggest drivers for health. And then as you climb up, maintaining cultural perpetuity, keeping that flywheel humming, is the key to healthy humans. I guess it's another way to say relational health drives and contributes to all the other kinds of health. So when you compare those, it's pretty clear that Maslow kind of distorted what he found playing anthropologist and put it through a very Western lens with a heavy emphasis on individualism and individual accomplishment, and really weeding out the community and relational dimensions of healthy humanity. It was probably a terrible disservice to us all, but it's good to know that it was there. Relational health contributes to longevity. Indigenous folks of every type have maintained a myriad of diverse ways to deliver community and relational health. Ceremony, cultural practice, community. It feeds all these other things like sense of purpose. The receiving is in the giving. Servant leadership, other things that people talk about and frame in different ways. And language, which is connection and community. If you go back to caveman days, we survived cave bears and saber-toothed tigers, not because we outcompeted the person in the next cave, not because we accumulated more resources than them. We survived those things because the person in the next cave loved us, and they would intervene if we were in trouble. As human beings, we are hardwired to need connection, belonging, and love. And the Western world heavily emphasizes individualism, materialism, and competition. I'm not saying a healthy competition can't serve positive purposes or things like that, but it's a very different way of looking at the world, and it sometimes works at cross purposes or injures some of the most critical things we need as humans to have a long, healthy, happy life. You could also think about it like this: what is colonization? And colonization has been many things, but among them there is a pervasive pattern of one group of people coming, trying to take one language, culture, and religion and use it to supplant all the others. It has been about erasure. And it's used a lot of violence to orchestrate the erasure. When you solve your problems with violence, though, it makes a bunch of other problems. Now, why would we think that all of the problems created by the colonial way of solving problems could be solved by the colonial way of solving problems? And they cannot. They cannot. And that's for all of us. I'm not just talking about, who's been at the victim end of historical processes. I do think when there's an oppression, yes, it's worse being the victim. But it's dehumanizing to everyone. To everyone. America's won most of its wars. And our proud, brave American soldiers have paid a heavy price. Not just in loss of life, but in mental health and all kinds of other things. Even when you win, quote unquote win, sometimes you lose. And so we need to find a different way. By the way, there are other things to think about with this. For those who are steeped in the culture of colonization, which is the culture of erasure, it also explains our politics today. One of the greatest fears will be fear of one's own erasure. White folk afraid of white erasure, and trying to put pressure to keep those stories as the story, which doesn't just injure those who are dealing with marginalization, but injures them too. We all need healing. And like, we're humans, we should practice humanity. We all need healing and we all deserve healing. White men dominate the ranks of school shooters, serial killers, and have one of the most plateaued and sometimes declining longevity data sets. We all need the healing. And the healing doesn't come from crushing the enemy, and keeping them out of here, which is really like throwing water over a chicken wire fence. It comes from successfully practicing humanity. And in spite of 500 pretty rough years, Native people are not just still here, but have still held on to more than vestigial remnants of some different ways to practice humanity. I've come to learn that so many of the things that we treasure, longevity, happiness, and so forth, they're not a destination. They're just a practice. You get married, you put a ring on a finger, and we say happily ever after, but that does not mean happily ever after, and I'm not just talking about divorce data. It's just a promise to practice at happily ever after. And some days, let's be honest, the practice goes better than others. Some months or years, it goes better than others. But if you keep practicing, you do become happier. Health, you can't get all your workouts in one day in the gym. It's practice. And let's be honest, some days better than others. But if you keep practicing, you do become healthier. And it's like that with all the other forms of healing, health, and happiness too. It's practice. I get to officiate at some of our most treasured ceremonies in Ojibwe country. It's been the great honor of my life. And as much as anything, our ceremonial space is a community of practice, where we practice feasting, and we practice offering, and we practice praying for others, not just ourselves, where we practice generosity and kindness and the investment of our time in someone else's well-being. We practice what Maslow first saw, and it pays tremendous dividends. I love Abigail Echo Hawk's quote where she said, "We are not a historically underserved population. My history is one of ancestors who survived so I could thrive. My history didn't start with Western civilization. I am colonially underserved. I'm institutionally underserved, and I am historically resilient." That is backed up by everything I've seen and studied. Even our modern data sets, where we see plenty of problems. When you go back to 1969, 50% of the Native population is below the poverty line. When you flash forward to today, it's 23%. Well, it tells you two things. One is 23% of a population below the poverty line is gross and unacceptable, and that's an indictment on America and its oppressions, not Native people and their lack of a work ethic. It also means we shaved 30-some points off of Indigenous poverty. Has to be the fastest growth rate out of poverty for any group in the country. So instead of looking at Indigenous people with paternalism and pity, we should be asking, how did they do that? How can we scale that up? How can we apply those lessons to everyone else? How can I ally myself to those efforts so we can do more and better? Instead of just, oh, those poor people. By the way, if you ever want to get things done in mixed company, paternalism and pity will not help you. I don't know how many of you have been in a romantic relationship or a marriage and approached your partner with paternalism and pity and had it go well. But if you approach them with partnership, something totally different starts to happen. Here too, there's a lot to learn. I was looking at, in spite of the things I've studied and what I've been learning about longevity, when you look at the data sets, this is the national aggregated stuff right off of the US Census, and the Native longevity data is the lowest of all disaggregated racial groups in the country. But that doesn't even tell you everything you need to know. We are internally diverse. 70% of tribal members are living off reservation, and there are huge differences between reservations and regions, and none of that tells you everything you need to know. They do not disaggregate by reservation, urban, rural, within the Native American longevity data, so it's a data, we got a lot of work to do there. However, we do have some, and it's more than anecdotal, there have been studies on longevity in certain tribal places. And some of them are much worse than that average. There are 10 million tribal members by the US Census, but that is self-identified. You can't just click a button and boil it down to enrolled tribal members. But I bet you would see some differences. Native people have the highest rate of marriage to people from other groups. We are especially multiracial, especially within the self-identified population. Some of the studies we've looked at, I almost hesitate to share something on Pine Ridge or something like that because they get picked on a lot. But it's not pretty. One of the studies was showing a life expectancy of 48 for men and 52 for women at Pine Ridge. Don't go thinking those poor people. It's complex. So why, when we found so many examples of Native people living a long time and so many healthy examples of Native people having cultures that provided an excellent platform for practicing relational health as well as eat right and exercise, how come we're at this? And I think some of the answers have to do with what happened after Christopher Columbus arrived. Colonization caused a lot of injury. And having it go on for so long. And I'm not going to do much on history lessons. There's a lot to study there. Someone showing up saying, I claim ownership of this land and I claim ownership of all these people. Must have been pretty disruptive when you thrived on community relational health. And all the other chapters throughout time. In a place like the United States, there were tribal groups who endured a Spanish colonization, a French colonization, a British colonization, a Russian colonization, a Dutch colonization, and then a whole new American colonization. It went on for a real long time. In many ways, you could make a pretty good case it's not over yet. Our modern educational system is still very colonial. Of all the stories in the historical tapestry that makes up America, we really sell a pretty narrow range of them. And it's a tremendous disservice to everyone. It is a disservice to those who are from marginalized communities not to have their own stories at the center of the narrative. It feels like the systems are the continuation of an age-old assault on our very ways of being, our identity. White students tend to do better in the colonial educational system. And if you're a white student and you go to school in America, you're pretty much guaranteed to have a white educator at some point. You might even have only white educators at every single point of the journey. People from marginalized groups are not guaranteed that. When we talk about things like white privilege, we're not talking about economic advantage, but the advantage of having your stories centered in the curriculum. The privilege of being taught by somebody from your own racial group. And so no wonder white students are doing better when their identity, stories, and so forth are affirmed at every level of the journey. But we're not trying to build a white empowerment program. We're trying to do education and opportunity for all. It's also a tremendous disservice to the white students to be prepared for a world that will never exist. Even if you're from North Dakota, one of the whiter parts of the United States, to prepare the white students for a world that will never exist. There will be a diverse world, and we should prepare them for their neighbors, work environments, and everything else. I really love this Gabor Mate quote. He said, "The opposite of addiction is not sobriety, it is connection." Even somebody dealing with alcohol addiction can heal to the point where they can walk into a bar and order a burger without falling off the wagon. If they are connected to anything, their higher power, their marriage, their family, their cultural practice, or even the person bringing them the burger. To me, language and culture is connection. It's about healing, not just another pretty bird singing in the forest. I won't be giving you a lot of history lessons, but from the first boatload that Columbus brought over on, it was on. Not a sharing, not a peaceful coexistence, but a taking through force. This is a lithograph about Columbus's second voyage, where they had a gold dust tribute and people were punished by having their hands chopped off and sicking dogs on them. The indigenous population of Hispaniola, what's now Haiti and the Dominican Republic, reduced from a number that could have been as high as 2 million to 10,000 within the first 15 years. That's some tough stuff. What's weird is that you can still find schools teaching stuff like this. Indian, Chris, this land is your land, this land is my land. That's weird. You know, at the 500th anniversary of Columbus, and I won't read this whole thing, this was a statement by the President of the United States, momentous year, greatest achievement, discovery, new world, set an example for us all. Monumental feats, perseverance, faith, support the quincentenary. And we're still dealing with the culture wars. First of all, with regard to culture wars, when we're all going eye for an eye, the whole world goes blind. Nobody wins when we fight over which story wins. And there are competing public goods that bump into each other. Freedom of speech matters, including the freedom of speech, to use a symbol that I think a lot of us would have a problem with. Inclusivity also matters. And so as we navigate these things, and I've been like on the state board that was making decisions about art in the state capitol, because they had this image right here, Father Hennepin discovering St. Anthony Falls, right behind the governor every time he was going to give a press conference. And the natives cowering at his feet and all this kind of stuff. And all of that was historically inaccurate and problematic, even though it was not like the grossest example, you know, of distortion. It was still an issue. And we had to talk about those things. And I said, look, I want my kids to learn about Hitler. I don't want his name erased from the history books. But I don't want a statue celebrating him in the town square. I want my kids to learn about Stalin and Mao and all kinds of people that I'd have an issue with their historical human rights record. But that doesn't mean that I want my kids to have to swallow a spoonful of racism every time they go to our state capitol. I want freedom of speech, including people who say things that I disagree with. But that doesn't mean that that line has to be right behind the governor every time he gives a speech. That we should not burn up all the artwork that we find objectionable. But it can be put in a museum where it can be contextualized and we can learn from it. And so the decision about what goes at the center is a decision about which stories or people deserve primacy of place in our shared space. Not about erasing one story and putting a different one in its place. And by the way, I totally understand that my grandchildren will have a different idea about who their heroes are and who they want to give primacy of place, and they should have the freedom to make that adjustment. So as we navigate these things, whether it's the Confederate flags and statues, or any number of objectionable historical figures, we don't have to have a bonfire with the art. But we can make more careful decisions about what deserves primacy of place. And I want to acknowledge that this stuff is really, really hard to talk about for so many reasons. Those of you in this room were brave enough to come to the talk. And maybe you got conscripted by a professor and got some extra credit or whatever. But you came. And a lot of people do not. I think it's healthy to acknowledge this is hard. It is hard for everyone. And what's hard for one person is different from what is hard for another. A lot of white folk are having a hard time because they're scared. Scared of offending someone, scared of exposing an ignorance, and just tired of getting beat up around the ears for the sins of their ancestors that they could not control. For Native people, though, there's a whole different thing going on, and other people of color. For there, it's like frustration and anger. Do I really have to explain it again? Is it that hard to understand? Do I really have to wait patiently longer when I don't get to live as long? So you have different challenges. So for the white folk, part of the advice is be brave. Be brave and lean in. It's kind of like there's a certain musculature that gets exercised with racial discomfort. It's getting harder for white folk to avoid racial discomfort, but can still be pretty insulated. Like you can travel the world, someone will speak to you in English. You even buy a house in Costa Rica where the official language is Spanish. You can have a maid staff do the whole real estate transaction all in English, even though the official language is Spanish. There's so many examples. So it's kind of like you've been skipping leg day for a long time. And now someone wants you to go to the gym. And that does not sound good. Especially when they're asking you to go to the gym when everybody's watching and it's your first day doing leg day. Like, are you serious? That sounds not good. To be perfectly honest, if you come to the gym, I cannot promise that it will feel good. It might not. 330 million humans in the United States of America, someone will go sideways sometimes. But if you go to the gym and you keep going, you acclimate to that, and it does start to feel good. Back to the Blackfeet example of what Maslow first saw. It's a chance to connect with community and contribute to community relational health. That if you keep going, you will also get stronger. And then you can do your part of the lift. And we need you to do your part of the lift. I know there are a lot of people who are saying to the stories of America's ugly chapters, please do not disrupt my consciousness with reality. I don't want to hear it. You can't talk about that. Let's purge the Navajo code talkers from, U.S. military websites, and let's restore the medals to the people who butchered folks at Wounded Knee. History will judge them harshly, but those folks are dealing with a lot of anger and shame. And it's natural when somebody feels shame and anger to lash out and be defensive. As humans practicing humanity, they need to be held to. And for the Indigenous folk and other people of color, to the questions about, do I really have to explain it again or whatever, like, we do. We got to show up to the gym too. And sometimes to spot other folks when they're doing their first day at leg day. And when you do, you get a chance to practice humanity, to practice relational health. The diversity is here forever. We're only a couple decades away from the British population being majority people of color. The British population. 30% of the German population is born somewhere other than Germany. There's no way out of diversity. It is our future. It's our present and our future. We must figure out how to get along. The Germans tried to kill all the Jews. And they had one of the richest countries with one of the most well-developed militaries, and they could not pull it off. There is no way to purge diversity from a place like the United States of America, no matter who's running the immigration policy. The majority of the documented kids in this country, documented, are people of color. We must figure out how to get along. There's no way around that. And so, it is so hard. You got to think about like all the things. I don't know if you saw the Joe Biden apology for residential boarding schools. That was like right before the last election, and there was a lot going on, so some people might not have caught that. And you would have thought a US president saying, that was not okay, would have got a warm reception from the Native community, but it did not. There were a lot of people who were like, this is pandering for votes 2 weeks before an election, political opportunism, please leave me alone. There were folks who were saying, come on. There was a room full of people who had survived residential boarding schools there. It's not like he gave them the mic, listened to their stories, and said, that was terrible, I'm so sorry. There were so many things. The critiques included, how about some restorative justice actions here? This apology should have come 150 years ago and every year ever since, and you should have allocated some monies for Indigenous language revitalization to do something about all the languages you tried to crush in all of these schools. And you have no moral authority to say anything because you're implicit in funding and supporting a genocide ongoing in Gaza right now. Those were critiques I heard. And I was listening to the critiques and I thought, dang, there's actually merit in all of them. And at the same time, I was thinking something else. That my grandmother had gone to residential boarding school and she had a trauma experience. She lived to age 98 and she was waiting, and I think it would have meant something to her to hear a US president say what we did to you was not okay. I would never compel someone to embrace an apology if they're not ready to hear it. But I would never compel someone to repudiate one if they are. And I was also thinking, we've just had 500 years in a row of shut up culture. Somebody says there's a historical injustice. Columbus was not a saint. And somebody's saying, shut up. Somebody's saying there's a contemporary oppression. and this is not right. And somebody else is saying, shut up, quit playing a race card. That we've had 500 years in a row of shut up culture, and it might not be wise to answer 500 years of shut up culture with shut up. Someone has to find the grace to be the first one to restore the practice of humanity. And also, we're all pitiful humans. Like, truly pitiful and truly human. And when a little bitty baby takes their first toddling steps and wipes out, you're not like, shame on you. You can do better than that. I'm not even going to look at you for a year until you get that right. You're like, good job, baby, keep it coming, you can do it, I believe in you. Let's be honest. America is an emotional toddler. I don't care if you're a Democrat, Republican, or something else altogether. We can agree on that. America is an emotional toddler. Like literally, my dad's bigger than your dad level toddler. It's just my inauguration's bigger than your inauguration or whatever. So, good job, baby. Keep it coming. You can do it. Ineloquent, ill-timed, imperfect, someone's got to take the first steps. But don't stop there. Got to take the next one, and the next one, and the next, because we got a lot of journey ahead of us. I like this Howard Zinn quote. He said, "To be hopeful in bad times is based on the fact that human history is not only of cruelty, but also of compassion, sacrifice, courage, and kindness." If we see only the worst, it destroys our capacity to do something. If we remember those times and places where people have behaved magnificently, this gives us the energy to act. And if we do act, in however small a way, we don't have to wait for some grand utopian future. The future is an infinite succession of presents. And to live now as we think human beings should live, in defiance of all that is bad around us, is itself a marvelous victory. In other words, we remake the world in miniature every day. We can make things different every day. We can practice humanity and healing and reconciling and happiness every day. Man, I'll close with a personal story, and then we can open this up for some questions and answers and so forth. I didn't share an awful lot about my family story. I have a really amazing family. Julie got to know some of them because we went to high school together. My mother was an enrolled member at White Earth, but her father was enrolled at Leech Lake, and she lived at Leech Lake and grew up there. And she struggled through incredible poverty, but ended up becoming the first female Native attorney in the state of Minnesota. She has an amazing story of her own. When we get to questions, feel free to probe about the personal as well as professional. My father was not Native at all. He was an Austrian Jewish immigrant and survivor of the Nazi Holocaust. My mom had some tough experiences. The baby snatchers literally tried to snatch her and take her away for a foster care placement. And her uncles drove over there and broke her out in the middle of the night and brought her home. And she was raised with her parents. No one ever showed up again because there was no court process, no service of papers, no service by publication. They were literally baby snatching. Otherwise, someone would have come back. And they never did. And I think in many ways for me, America tried to kill my mom. And it tried and succeeded in saving my dad. It's many things. It's a beautiful place, full of beautiful humans, with a foundational promise that is real and worth fighting for. And it is at the same time a land of many oppressions, historical and contemporary. And we do not get to healed by skipping the healing. And we do not get to reconciled by skipping the reconciling. We have to do the things. And I myself have been stumbling and bumbling and rumbling and trying to figure things out, trying to make sense of it, and also at the same time trying to parent and now grandparent and things like that. This is one of my kids. And we have a huge family. We have 9 kids. If any of you like kids, let me know. Always hunting for sitters. But actually, we only have 2 left to launch, and then we'll be empty nesters. I told my wife that means we can start dating. You know. But we also have a big, beautiful, blended family. Kids that are his, theirs, and somebody else's. And this kid, I was married previously, and really when my ex-wife had a terrible descent into the darkness, the kind that swallows a lot of people. Got into alcohol, drugs, stuff like that. She's still alive, but kind of barely. She's incarcerated at the moment, but has spent a lot of her time unhoused and in active addiction. We tried everything to save her, and we could not. The number one job as a parent is do not mess your kid up, and you do not get any do-overs. This kid was an infant in arms when she fell, so he was the recipient of the kind of blessings and curses only a father can bestow. He has no memory of being held by his mom. And he was navigating that, in addition to all of these family stories in a country that's not always kind to people of color. And I was so worried about him and everybody else. Like, how do I protect them from this and everything that we created and the epigenetic imprint of all the historical traumas and all the things? And kind of felt like a lot. I was at one point up to 7 children, single parenting. That's where all the gray hairs come from. And there were some funny things that were going on too, but I really relied upon our culture as a way to practice healing. We had a ceremony where we blessed our new house and blessed a little eagle feather and hung it on the southwest corner of the house. And I said, this will be like a Passover when it's storming, you know, you'll be safe here. And he was pretty little. It would start storming, he'd run outside and do a lap around the house and come back in soaking wet. And I'm like, baby, what are you doing? Oh, just checking on a feather. And it seemed to reassure him. We have another ceremony we call a bear smoke, where we build a miniature wigwam and we put little offerings in for each member of the family, keep us together. And same thing, he'd be running around in the woods playing, and he'd stop and he'd look at that, and then he'd smile, and it seemed to be reassuring to him. And I remember one time I took all the kids to eat, which I didn't do a lot, you know, struggling on money and everything else for a while. But we'd say it'd have to be a buffet for instant gratification. And I'd say put us in the far back, as far away from normal humans as possible. And because twice people clapped when we left restaurants. Like, no joke, like it was bad. And one time he was trying to get the coat on the kid and he couldn't get his hands through the sleeves. I said, all right, baby, what's in your hands? I got the mac and cheese. And he's like smuggling 2 cents worth of mac out of the buffet. I'm like, why are my kids the resiest kids on the res? And, you know, but at the same time, I was also thinking, like, is he gonna have issues? Like, his mom can be taken, so anything can be taken. So like, now he's gonna be hiding candy bars between the mattresses or whatever. The kid actually turned out to be a very outgoing kid. He got into music, and we had show choir, which is kind of like Glee Club. I had to watch every episode of the show Glee with my children, which was a bit of a lift for me because all the drama, you know, like, oh, please, like, I see enough. But I was teasing this kid, and I was like, you know it's gonna be like that show. Whoever's dating at the start of the year, they're all gonna switch by the end of the year, so keep that stuff in pencil. There's gonna be crying, lots of clapping, a big trophy. It's gonna be awesome. He's like, shut up, Dad, you don't know. I was like, okay, we'll see. And I had to miss his first out-of-town meet, so I said, I don't care if it's midnight, 1 a.m., you call me. So I got this late night call, which I wish I could have recorded, because it starts with, Dad, I love you. I'm like, I love you too, son, how's it going? And I got like a dozen spontaneous I love yous out of a teenage boy. It's like, I love you, Dad, we won, I love you, everybody's crying, they're all hugging each other. And I'm like, I told you. Things are going well. Oh, then there's the pandemic. School's canceled, prom's canceled, show choir's canceled, blah. And all kids do need to break from their parents. It's normal and it's healthy. They have to find their own voice and their independence. But it's always seemed to happen at the most awkward, inopportune time, especially with the boys, because they'd mature a little later, and then they'd have it out with me. And like losing influence over your kid when it's time to launch is a really tough time to lose influence over your kid. And so I had to push him a little bit. I said, son, listen, there are 1,000 definitions of success. And you don't need to pick anything that I come up with. You just got to pick something. And you got one brother who's working on a union construction job, and he is happy. And you got some siblings who've gone to college. Like, you pick, I support. You want coaching? I'm in, but that's not even a requirement. You just got to pick, because life will keep happening. So eventually he was like, okay, college. It's like, college, awesome, this sounds great. Like, where do you want to go? What do you want to do? And he said, well, I was looking at all those schools in, Dartmouth. Of all those Ivy League schools, that's the one that has some decent native programs. I was thinking about that. And I was thinking, that's awesome. I was also thinking, how do we pay for that? Hadn't bumped into the guy running the Cobell scholarships yet. And also, I was thinking, 7% of the people who apply get in. But it's not my job to shut doors, it's my job to support. So I said, go for it. And he wrote an essay, it was so powerful. He wrote about his mom, times when he was sad or mad, and times when he couldn't feel anything except guilty. He wrote about my father and my grandmother, all those experiences that we shared briefly with you. And then he said some really profound things for a teenage kid. He said, we are more than the sum of our traumas. And all that trauma stops with me. From a kid. It was pretty awesome. It took us a little while. We got... Let's go! Oh, I'm so happy for you. Oh, my boy.
I didn't think I was going to make it.
Oh, I miss you.
Let's go! Come here, Evan!
I think I was always worried, would he self-sabotage on his way out the door? Would he deny himself opportunity for the sake of familiarity? People told me things at times, like you saved those kids, you pulled them out of the darkness, and I thought that does not sound accurate at all. If anything, it was very much the other way around. Every time he was finding a way to sing through adversity, to move forward in spite of all the things. He was restoring my faith in the decency of human beings, in the dividends we get when we practice our humanity, and when we do it not in isolation, but in community. That he was wise beyond his years, and we could all learn something from him. So on this Indigenous Peoples Day, I hope that we can give primacy of place to those who have so much to teach about what healthy humans would look like, what healing and reconciliation could look like, that we can hold each other up instead of tear each other down, that it will give us an inflection point to practice our shared humanity. because the only way through all of this stuff is together. Miigwech, thank you so much.